Hi and welcome to the wilds of suburbia, and thank you to Adam for asking me to be part of Revs Restored. It's very kind of you. My name's Alistair Clements and I'm Editor-in-Chief of Classic and Sports Car magazine. Now, I've been going through the old issues of Classic and Sports Car while we've been on lockdown, which has been really fun, and I stumbled across the first report I ever wrote about this, which is my 1957 MG Magnette ZB. And I realised it's almost exactly 10 years since I bought it and first brought it home. Now, I know the theme of this weekend's videos is restoration, and I have to confess I have never really restored anything except for my first Morris Minor, and I just had a little look on the DVLA's website, and it turns out that came off the road about 2 months after I sold it, so obviously it wasn't a particularly brilliant restoration. But this car has actually been restored fully once and had sort of various revivals since. 10 years ago, my youngest child was coming up to 1 year old, and I had a Volvo 1800 ES, which I don't know if any of you have ever been in one, but it's really not much of a family car despite what I was telling myself. So I was trying to find a family classic car and I stumbled across Magnettes, and I was looking for ages and ages with the help of a guy called Paul Buffo at the Magnette Register, who's fantastically helpful, and he kept telling me, go for a ZB, don't bother with a ZA, which is the original type, which has the rather lovely wraparound trim around the wheel arches. You see on this one it has chrome spears down the side instead, and I had my heart set on a ZA, looked for ages and ages, and he kept telling me, no, there's this ZB in Bristol that you really ought to look at, it. So eventually I thought, oh, I'll go and have a look at it, and we opened the garage door to this, and I fell in love with it and knew I was going to buy it. So at the time, it was fresh from restoration, but had actually been in storage for 6 years. So the chap who bought it had bought it in the 70s, and he spent over 20 years restoring it, absolutely lovingly doing everything. Those spears on the side are actually cast in brass and then chromed, using an original as a template. And he did a fantastic job. In fact, I can show you something that shows what a great job he did. So the car was finished just in time for the 50th anniversary of the Z Magnette in 2004. And this is a trophy he won at its very first outing, having been restored. But unfortunately, the story is also rather tainted with a bit of tragedy. He was married at the time, he'd spent 2 decades on the restoration, poured his heart and soul into it, and his partner rather felt that he'd poured a bit too much into it. They parted, she blamed the car, horrendously burnt all the photographs of the restoration, so sadly that's one thing I don't have to go with it. And he was so upset by it that he put the car in the garage for 6 years, never using it, until I came along and I was the lucky beneficiary. I said it's been revived a few times. That's mainly my fault, because work and life does tend to get in the way. I'm sure many of you feel the same. And cars get neglected for periods and then you revive them. And unfortunately the clutch went about 3 years ago on the Magnette when it was in my garage at the back, and it was incredibly hard to get the car out. I was very busy, so it just sat for tragically 2 full years. Completely my fault, but these things happen. And then I got chatting to the guys at the Heritage Skills Academy at Bicester Heritage during one of the fantastic Bicester Sunday Scrambles, and they were fascinated by the story and sympathetic to the fact that life does get in the way sometimes, and they were looking for a car for their apprentices to practice on, and they said, why don't we take yours in, have a go at it and see if we can get it revived. So it went up to Bicester. With the help of a load of mates, we managed to extract it from the garage. It went up to Bicester and it was there for about 4 or 5 months. And the apprentices were absolutely amazing. They changed the clutch, they overhauled the brakes, they got it running beautifully, and they really seemed to really love working on the car because it's such a lovely, simple thing to work on. I mean, underneath it's not dissimilar to an MGA. We've got a B Series 1500, and then the mechanicals are all mainly shared with the other MG models. And now it runs better than ever, which is fantastic, and fingers crossed, I'll show you that in a bit because we're going to go for a run. But before we do, I'd like to show you my favourite thing about the car, which is the interior. if we're being strict about it, this interior isn't entirely original, because the seats were retrimmed by Glyn during the restoration, and I think they were originally red, but they're now this rather nice two-tone tan with brown piping, which I've really got to like. But my favourite thing by a mile is this fantastic dashboard. It's just gorgeous. I love the wheel, the big sprung wheel with its separate horn rim in the middle. Annoyingly, I've managed to chip the steering boss by dropping it, and I've bought 2 more on eBay and neither of them are as good, so we're stuck with a chipped original for now. But the dashboard itself is lovely. It's got two-tone timber with walnut veneers on the glove box and the dash, and then this lighter timber across the top. My favourite thing, without a doubt, is this octagonal or half octagonal dashboard, which reflects the octagonal MG badge. And then we've got these little separate instruments around the side for temperature, oil pressure, charging and fuel, which inevitably is not working at the moment, so let's hope we don't run out of fuel in a minute. The interior itself is so comfortable. It's really roomy. There's 4 of us in my family and it's plenty spacious enough for us. So much so that we've actually taken it on holiday to Tuscany for a week before, which was amazing. The Italians loved it because clearly there aren't very many MG Magnettes in Italy. And in order to make it safe for the family, I had these put in, which look like they've always been here. Had it done by QuickFit SBS. And they did a really beautiful job of making seatbelts look as if they were always in the car. So these ones on the back as well. And then of course there's my nodding dog on the back shelf, who has been with us everywhere we go. So, fingers crossed we're not going to have too many starting issues today. Beautiful. And let's take it for a little run. So it's kind of a shame that you don't have smell-o-vision, really. That's the other thing about this car that I've always enjoyed, is it smells fantastic. It's sort of the perfect ode to old car. I also love driving it. My Volvo, as well as not being very practical, just never really clicked with it as a car to drive, whereas the Magnette is surprisingly sweet handling, steers really nicely, and has a lovely gear change, although it's a little bit weak on the synchromesh into second these days, is a little bit weak. The other thing that's a bit weak is the trafficator on this side, which sticks for some reason, but unfortunately, because it's a nice warm day and it's not wet, it's working reasonably well. I guess I should change it over to indicators, but I love the trafficators there. There's something very incredibly charming about them. So by modern standards you would never call a Magnette fast, but it goes beautifully actually. It rows along on the motorway quite happily at sort of 65. What it desperately needs is another gear. I'm in 4th already, we're only doing 40 miles an hour and I'm already sort of reaching for another ratio. And of course the great pleasure of a car like this is just driving. That's probably enough from me. I hope you've had a great weekend. Thanks again to Adam. And I hope we get out of this situation very soon so we can all get out and meet up and share these stories together.